Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here with a really big but exciting ask from you this week. In the show notes of this podcast and on our site and on our Instagram and basically everywhere we can put it is a survey we'd love for you to please fill out. But it's not just your average survey. It's a survey that could lead to a whole lot more small-scale organic farming research being done, led by our very own host, but also professional researcher, Natalie Lounsbury. No-Till Growers has wanted a research team for years, and by filling out this survey, you help us get one step closer to having extensive research capacity. But it all starts with this survey. The survey takes just a couple minutes. It's super easy, and we could use as many responders as possible. Find the link in the show notes, and thank you. Now, back to your regularly scheduled nerdy ear candy.
Hey everyone, it's Alex Ball with another episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast. On today's show, we chat with Liana Glass, who along with their partner Duncan, runs City Beet Farm on leased yards and lots in urban Vancouver. These first-generation farmers are actually the third owners of this farm, so we dig deep on buying and valuing a farm business, partnering with local organizations, and building your own mobile wash pad. So any further ado, let's look to the show with Liana Glass of City Beet Farm.
Today's episode is brought to you by RIMOL Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. RIMOL Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimolgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a RIMOL tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by Orisha. Orisha is a greenhouse automation company whose mission is to make agriculture more ecological and productive through advanced technology. Orisha automates all temperature, humidity, and irrigation management systems. Their products are designed to be instinctive, easy to install, and wireless, and their remote management application allows growers to save time. In addition, the integration of AI in their programs offers more precision and better control over the various factors influencing the environment inside your greenhouse. Last thing, Orisha wants to help market gardeners optimize their yields. Automating allows a better quality of life, can save several weeks of labor costs, and saves nearly 20% in energy costs. Listeners can use the promo code NOTILLGROWER, that's 3 words, NOTILLGROWER, to get 15% off your order. Check them out at orisha.io. That's ORISHA.io. All right, enjoy the show.
So Liana, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and just chat with me for a little bit about your farm operation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's finally nice to put face to the name. I've actually been a fan of City Beet Farm since the very beginning, and once I've seen now it's been through a few owners, I'm happy to now talk to, is this the third owner?
Yeah, you got it. That's really nice to hear. I don't think I even was aware of City Beet since the beginning. Definitely for a few years, like before we took it over. But yeah, I definitely feel that, like, carrying on the legacy. And so I think hopefully I represent the work of the people who came before us. Okay.
Well, I know you will. So what was the process like, kind of the timeline for buying this farm business?
Yeah, so kind of like an overview of what the process was like. Like, we saw that initial post that they put online that the business was for sale. And then, we kind of thought about it. And then sort of early November 2020, I think we first reached out to the previous owners by email and we said, we're interested. And they had kind of set up this process where they were doing Zoom calls. So I think we had just like an initial Zoom call to introduce ourselves and kind of ask any initial questions that we had. And then they had made, this must have been a lot of work, they made a Google Drive folder with sort of certain documents of the farm, like nothing too sensitive, but just some of their records and any of the like really crucial information they had like redacted, so that it was just like not giving away everything, but enough so that any prospective buyers could see what you would get in terms of records. So we did that and we like reviewed those for a while and we had another Zoom meeting and then we had to submit an official letter of intent, just so they could know which of the people they were speaking to were actually interested in proceeding. And then a couple weeks, so that was like early December, and then mid-December, we put in our official offer letter. So the full on, like, yes, at this point, there's no turning back. Like, we want to buy the farm. And then after a few days, Duncan and I heard back from them, and they said, yes, we're accepting your offer on the farm. And so that was also like about the dollar amount, because they had an asking price. And then we ended up offering the asking price because it seemed fair to us. So then they accepted that. And then from there, they shared like all the full documents with us, and there was sort of a due diligence process. So that was us looking through the documents and making sure that all the records we would want in the sale were available. And the closing date for the sale was set to be February 1st, 2021. So kind of we had basically the month of January to review all of these documents and all the records and ask them any questions we had, and also in that month to be drafting the sale agreement. So that was like really my crash course in all of these kind of business terms, and be like looking into any part of the business that we needed to make sure made sense to us. And I'm very fortunate in that both of my parents are lawyers, so they were very helpful.
Perfect. Okay.
And I know not everybody has access to that. So that was very, very lucky and helpful. And then sort of two of the really key parts of that were that in the, anything that you want to happen needs to be written down in the sale agreement, which is kind of hard. It was really hard going into it. I found that quite stressful because I was like, well, I don't know what I'm getting into. Like, it's hard to put yourself in the future and imagine anything that you might want. But sort of two key parts of that for us were that they had offered for us to pay for the business in 3 installments. So the first third of the price was on that closing date, and then a third was 5 months later, I think in June. So like once we had some CSA income and we're starting to have some market income. And then the final payment we paid like a full year later. And so that was, I think in business terms, that's called a vendor loan, because they're essentially loaning you money without any money like actually going from them to you. They're like loaning you the business until you
Makes
can
sense.
borrow it from them. And then so we went and got that loan from Farm Credit Canada to be able to pay them even in those installments. But that's a really, really nice arrangement, and I think is pretty common in buying at least small businesses, is my understanding.
And when you went to get the farm credit, what information do you bring with you to the farm credit to show your intent to purchase this business? Did they require like a list of assets and all that stuff ahead of time to go over it, or were they pretty lenient with you on that? That's
a good question. I'm not sure I remember fully. I don't know. So one of the like due diligence documents that Maddie and Liana provided us was the list of assets of the farm, and I think I did have to provide that to get the Farm Credit Canada loan. And then I had to fill out like a net worth statement. So I probably had to just sort of transfer that information into there, because by then I did technically own the City Beet assets. And then you had to like declare any other money that I might have and stuff like that. That was an odd thing to fill out, like my net worth. I'm a businesswoman. Yeah. And then I had to show the business plan. And that was another thing where Maddie and Alana had a business plan from earlier on. And they had updated it a little bit. And then I did some work to update it just to reflect mine and Duncan's vision for the farm. So I think those were kind of the key documents for getting that loan.
That sounds really valuable, having that business plan, that proven business plan's already up and going to then turn over and show to them.
That was so nice. It was really helpful to have that and just be like not starting from zero, which of course is like the main benefit of taking over an existing farm. It was super helpful. And then the other key element in what we were sort of crafting in our sale agreement for the farm was that part of the arrangement was that Maddie and Alana would mentor us for our first year. And that ended up being super casual, but we kind of had to think through what we would want from that. So we had, we could email them any questions that we would have, and they would try to answer them within 24 hours. And then we set up like a weekly Zoom or phone call. And then there were a few times where they came out in person to show us how things went. It ended up being very casual, but it was also in writing in the sale agreement. And yeah, and that was kind of, in a nutshell, the overview of that timeline of the process.
Wow, so it was only a few month process from start to finish. That's pretty fast.
Yeah, it really, I guess it was. And it was, I mean, of course, very smart of them. They had to, put the farm up for sale sort of at the end of that 2020 season. And then we were able to do the transfer in the winter and then like hit the ground running. So the farm didn't miss a season. That's
fantastic. It's probably really valuable for the customers too, to have like no real interruption in that process.
Yeah, I hope it felt smooth for them. I definitely, that was our hope. And I think from our end, it seemed, like it was a lot to learn and take on and stuff. But we were able to continue the production in the CSA and stuff. So I hope it felt like that for everybody involved.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned it earlier, but like, it's the value of those assets. Like, have that business plan, have those processes already going. This makes that whole system so much faster. And I can just imagine going there and applying for that loan without a proven business plan ahead of time. It's probably just it's a really dragged out process. But I'm glad to hear it worked so fast.
Totally. I'm sure. I mean, like the bank doesn't like show you their inner workings, but I'm sure that helped because they were like, oh, look, this farm has already been running for 8 years. We know this business model works for sure.
So for folks who don't know about the farm, where are you located? What zone are you in? And kind of like, what's the size of land you're cropping right now?
So City Beet Farm is a multi-site urban farm. We grow in people's front and backyards. So just in residential neighborhoods in what is known as Vancouver on traditional, ancestral, and unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. So that's in British Columbia, Canada, in the Pacific Northwest. And I believe we are in USDA zone 8 or 9. I think maybe historically it was more 9, but now with climate change, probably more 8. This winter we had record-breaking cold temperatures in December down to negative 13 Celsius, which I think, I looked this up, is about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. You're welcome.
Thank you.
I don't want to falsely represent that I actually speak Fahrenheit, so I did look that up. And right now we have 12 yards, and most of them, for people who know Vancouver, are in sort of the Mount Pleasant, Riley Park neighborhoods, which are pretty central residential, like old inner suburb vibe residential, or maybe not even a suburb, but like single family dwellings mostly, but very much in the city. And then we have one of our yards that is as big as all the other yards put together. And it's out in this really odd neighborhood called Southlands, which is in Vancouver, like in the city of Vancouver, but it's right on the southern edge of the city, right along the Fraser River. And it was created in the 1800s so that people could own horses in the city of Vancouver. So you like cross over this street that is the boundary of the city, and it sort of is bounded by this one major street, and then on the two sides, golf courses, and then the river. And it's this odd pocket where you like cross this street and it feels like you're in the British countryside. It's all these like big houses, huge properties, horses everywhere. So we have one yard out there that is technically just somebody's backyard, but it's a 1/4 acre. So that is half our farm. Our farm altogether is just under half an acre. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, cool. So how far away is that outer plot, let's say, from your network of smaller yards?
Yeah. I don't actually know in a distance measurement, but it takes us about 20 minutes to drive there.
Okay. So a little farther outside of town. Okay, cool. And so in the Pacific Northwest, so is that like, what are the temps in the summer? What are the highs you're getting?
Again, this
in
is
Celsius.
Climate change, and these will be in Celsius because I didn't look it up. So the last 2 summers we've had really bad heat waves. So I grew up in Vancouver, and I feel like I'm always that annoying kid from the Magic School Bus who's like at my old school. But like when I was a kid, this is a temperate rainforest, like really mild temperatures all year round. It would maybe snow once a year, and then it would get rained away. And I remember as a kid, like sitting on the beach on an island near Vancouver, and it was 23 degrees and I was uncomfortably warm. And now it gets to be 30. And like last summer, we had what people were referring to as a heat dome, where it was like 30 and above all of July and August, basically. And And then this summer, a bit less of a heat dome. And it was like, we had a very cold, wet spring. So it didn't get warm until mid-July. But even then, like into August, we did hit 30 a couple times. So that was very hot. But it would normally be like mid-20s would be hot around here in the summer.
And being in an urban area, I'm assuming you have like heat island effect with all the concrete and all the other stuff like that. So did that have a big effect on your production this last season?
It's hard for me to say because I have now been running City Beet with my partner. Well, I guess I didn't really introduce that part, but so I run this farm with my partner, Duncan. And Duncan had more farming experience than I did, but so we've been running City Beet for 2 years. We're going into our third season, and that's my whole farming experience. So 2 summers ago, our first year running the farm, I think in some ways, because we don't really have greenhouses or anything, like the heat, it definitely made some lettuce bolt. We lost some crops. It was so hot that even like the tomatoes were aborting some of their flowers. But except for that one flower set of tomatoes that didn't make it, like the rest of the tomatoes were pretty happy. And then we didn't get blight until quite late in the season. And then this past summer, just because it was so cold, and then all of a sudden it was really hot, I think that dramatic shift, it was less detrimental than I was worried it might be. Like when it was still quite soggy and cold in early July, I was like, man, if it ever gets hot, these plants are going to be so shocked. But most of them actually handled it okay, I think. But then we definitely had more weeds. There were some of our beds that were like just swamps, and then and more disease pressure than the previous season for sure.
Kind of follow along with that, all that heat. Yeah. So you said this is your second season on the farm. So your partner Duncan, you said combined, what's kind of your previous farming experience that led you to buying City Beet Farm?
Yeah. I'll talk about Duncan first. So Duncan first got into farming, I'm not going to remember the year, maybe 2015. He and I both went and did our undergrads at a school called McMaster, which is in Hamilton, which is near Toronto in Ontario. And Duncan took an environmental education course. And one of the sort of like field trips that they did in this course was to visit an urban farm in Hamilton. And Duncan was really struck by it. And he thought, like if the apocalypse comes, like, I don't know how to make my own food. So that was sort of his impetus for getting into farming. And he won himself a research grant so that he could volunteer on this urban farm. And then he actually found another peri-urban farm just outside of Hamilton. And he spent the summer volunteering on both and doing research. And the one urban farm that was actually in the city is kind of the most similar farm that I know about to City Beet. It's also multiple sites, and they had one yard that was just outside of the city that was bigger than all their other yards. It's called Backyard Harvest, if anybody wants to look it up, run by a guy named Russ. And Duncan ended up working there for 4 years. So Duncan spent 4 seasons working on this farm when he was in school in the winter, and then in the summers he would work on this farm. And they, it was like a similar setup, small scale, multi-site. And then we moved back to Vancouver, or back for me because I grew up here and Duncan grew up in Ontario, so to Vancouver in 2018, and we were both going to UBC, the University of British Columbia. He was doing a master's in landscape architecture, and I was doing a master's in urban planning. And at that point, Duncan kind of thought that he was done with farming. He really loved it, but he has a very curious mind, and I think he really likes to do research. And he thought, like, I love working with the landscape and I like working with plants, but maybe I'll try landscape architecture and see how that goes. And I was doing urban planning. So then I'll talk about myself. Before this, I've always been like aware of agriculture. I think I come from a family that really values like whole food, and my mom and my grandpa always had gardens when I was growing up, but yeah, I didn't have experience really farming. There's one summer where I volunteered like once a week on a little urban farm called the Mason Street Farm in Victoria, British Columbia. And in school, in my undergrad and in my master's, I had like done research projects on urban agriculture. So it was something that I was interested in. And I always sort of had this sense that I didn't want to have a desk job, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I ended up doing a lot more school than I enjoyed because I didn't really know what to do. So then fast forward, I'm done my master's. And I spent the year after I graduated from that kind of just taking on like smaller contract jobs. I wanted to try things that were more creative. So that's when I worked on that podcast. And then my sister, Emily, actually sent me and Duncan, or she tagged us in a post on Instagram that was like, City Beet Farm is for sale. And we both knew about City Beet before, but I didn't like follow them myself. And I kind of just missed it. I was like, oh, haha, funny joke, Emily. But then I just kept thinking about it. I couldn't let it go. And at that point, I thought Duncan was like done with farming. So I was like, could I do this on my own? Like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. But then I asked my sister, I was like, were you serious or were you just joking? And she was like, no, I was totally serious. I think you guys could do this. And then I was talking to Duncan and I was trying to get him to like hype me up, like give me a pep talk. And then he kind of convinced himself to get back into it. So that's kind of how it came about. And then so we entered into the process that Maddie and Alana, the previous owners of the farm, had set up for kind of vetting potential buyers. And I think, I don't know, it was a big leap, but I think I was not very happy with the path that I was on. I was feeling very like unsatisfied with what I'd been doing. And I think when I considered this seriously, I felt this like very profound sense of hope that I had not really felt before. So that was kind of how I knew I wanted to get into it. And then here we are.
Yeah. So what was that transition period like, going from one farmer's, being run by a couple, then to a whole new people? How did that work out with the transition where customers how'd that happen?
People were really, really great about it. I think, I'm not sure if it's partly because Maddie and Alana were not the first owners of City Beet. It was started in 2013 by two young women named Katie and Ruth, who I've actually never met, but they sound really great. They started an amazing thing. So yeah, I think maybe the fact that sort of transition had happened once before, the community was sort of aware of it and knew that everything would be okay in the end. And I think Maddie and Alana did a really great job of introducing us to everybody. And before they even put the farm up for sale, they had asked the existing homeowners whose yards are part of the farm. They were like, hey, we're going to sell the farm. Will you stay on even with the new owners, just so that we would come into it knowing how many yards were already part of it. So I do think the fact that at that point, the farm had already existed for 8 seasons, there was good like word of mouth, brand recognition. And it is, at that point, it was kind of, to the people who know about it, like an institution in the community, and people seem to like it. I think that really helped. And generally, the process on our end, like behind the curtains, was quite stressful, I found, just because, it was a new thing and it was scary and I knew I wanted to do it, but like, I didn't know anything about farming. I didn't know anything about running a business. It was a big deal. I had to take out a loan to buy the business. All these things were scary and new and a bit stressful. But in terms of reception from the community, everybody was very, very welcoming.
Oh, that's fantastic that you've had that brand recognition set up to kind of like maybe a little more easy transition. So I think most of us are used to working in more traditional systems where, you buy your land, you build the infrastructure, and then, let's say you sell the whole thing as a piece. How did that work when you're buying a business that's on rented land? Did it come with infrastructure? And how do you even value something like that that's not let's say a hard asset like a piece of land?
So I think my answer to this will probably make a little bit more sense if I just explain the technicalities of how our business works a little better. So we don't pay rent in money for the land that we use. We have sort of informal agreements with the homeowners, and they do sign on to commit to at least 3 years at a time, but really our agreement is not very binding. So if somebody wanted to leave, we would have no recourse to make them stay. So how it works is that homeowners get either a 50% discount off of our CSA share, and then they come like a normal CSA member and they pick it up once a week. And then they can also choose the option of, instead of that, just getting a weekly drop off of whatever we have lots of. So then it's delivered to their door, but they get a little bit less choice. And I think some people at first, when we explain this model of using people's yards, they're like affronted that we don't pay rent. But I think they're actually is a lot of value in what we do. Like just literally the vegetable exchange isn't the only thing that homeowners get out of it. There's just sort of whatever the inverse of opportunity cost is, opportunity.
Yeah.
They don't have to mow the lawn. And then there actually is like an indirect financial benefit, because a lot of people don't actually mow their own lawns. They pay someone else to do it, or they, pay someone to do really nice landscaping. And then there is sort of an aesthetic value, I think, just because of the urban form in Vancouver. A lot of the yards that we use are front yards. So it's like a beautiful, I think, and kind of interesting, maybe conversation starter front yard that people get to have. So I think there is this sort of indirect and sometimes also intangible exchange of benefits. It's I think, a mutually beneficial relationship. So then talking about like the exchange of the business in terms of assets, I do believe Maddie and Alana consulted someone who was a business valuator. And they, in their time running the farm, so they ran it for the 4 years prior to us buying it. They had more than doubled the growing space and more than doubled, or roughly doubled, I guess, the number of CSA members. The year before they sold the farm, did a Kickstarter and built this insulated wash pack station that's like in a trailer. So they had definitely added a lot to the business. So I don't actually know like the inner workings of what this, or even who the business valuator was, or like their process in figuring things out exactly. But I think a common way of valuing businesses is like the average profit from the 3 previous years times some multiplier. And then I think the multiplier approximately that was used for our farm was 1.5. And I have been told that is quite a low multiplier in terms of buying a business. And then our business, because we don't own many like expensive, tangible physical assets, and there's no land being owned, is in the world of businesses, it was like not a lot of money. To us, it was a lot of money, but in the world of buying a business, it was not a lot of money. So I think that sort of multiplier math is the math that I did to make sure that like their asking price was a price we were okay with paying. So I think there was that. And then I do remember looking at the valuation of the business. They had a list. They were very, very organized, and they had a list of all the physical assets, like small tools, greenhouse. The big trailer was the biggest one, because they bought that new with the Kickstarter money. So it was worth quite a bit of money relative to everything else. And then the truck that we need for pulling the trailer around and going around harvesting and stuff. And then on top of that, there was what's called goodwill. So that's like the brand name recognition and the intangible assets, all like the website and the Instagram account that had 5,000 followers and stuff like that. And I think the intangible assets were, can I do this math? They were over 1/3 of the value of the business.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I feel like those intangibles in my business, like the systems, the website, the flow, is really expensive to set up. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to get right. So I can totally see that being a third is a decent portion.
Totally. Yeah. And what you're saying is absolutely true. And our experience of it, we were able to come in and in my first year of being a farmer, but what was not the 9th year of this farm, we were able to run the farm at the same level of production and income that Maddie and Alana had the year before.
Congratulations.
So that, obviously if I'd been starting from scratch, it would have been a lot less than that. So yeah, we are constantly feeling the benefits of like all the work that the farmers before us did to set this business up.
That's fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that you've been able to continue the growth, and I can imagine like just taking over systems, it must be like so much. Not only is agriculture such a big shock and so much change, so much going on, but to be branded to a new business at the same time and to be able to maintain that over the next season after purchasing that's fantastic. So now that you're 2 years into this, is this something as far as like, do you see this as we'll do this for 10 years, we'll do it for 5 years, or see how life takes us? Or is this like, okay, we'll take this as far as we can go, and then we'll do the same thing that's happened in the past?
I don't have a cut and clear answer to that. I know that when Maddie and Alana bought the business from Katie and Ruth, they had a very firm plan. They were like, we're going to run this for 3 years and then we're going to sell it. We just want to learn how to run a business, how to run a farm, and then we'll sell it. And then they got to year 3 and they thought, we're not quite ready. Let's run it one more year and then we'll sell it. And that's exactly what they did. They had this plan from the beginning and they tweaked it a little bit, but that's exactly what they did. And I think scale wise, the farm is at a nice place for, they got it to a really nice place for like the amount of labor that we have. I think any significant change would result in needing a lot more labor and figuring things out. So I think it is at like an okay sort of sustaining level. And so that's one part of it. And then another part of it, I think, is just like mine and Duncan's sort of natural dispositions, maybe. Or maybe not even natural, because I do think this is something I'm working on. But with my answer to that question, I guess, is that we didn't come into it with the same sort of plan of like, we're going to sell it in 4 years exactly, even though that has been the trajectory of the business so far. My plan, and I think we're on the same page, is that we will just keep doing this as long as it feels good. And then if it ever stops feeling good, then we'll find a way out. But I think, yeah, and I find myself sort of, there are certain inherent inefficiencies of farming in the spaces that we're in. So sometimes I find myself thinking about how it would be nice to have a farm that's all in one spot. And I think just for myself, I maybe long-term want to live somewhere smaller than Vancouver. So I do find myself imagining a more like conventional small scale farm, not in the conventional agriculture sense, but in the sense of being in one spot. But we don't have any firm plans on that. And I'm not married to the idea of running this farm forever, but I'm also not committed to the idea of selling it after 4 years, just because that's what's been done. Yeah, that has kind of been part of the longevity of this farm, is I like that every 4 years, a new set of people comes in and kind of breathes new life into it. And I think that's really beautiful. And also, I kind of have this voice in the back of my head that I don't know if anybody actually thinks this. It's just, but it is critical. And it's like, oh, people must look at the fact that this business gets sold so often and be like, oh, that means it's not viable or whatever. And then I try to remind myself that it actually is this really nice process, and it is a good entryway for people like me without farming experience. But I liked the idea of like being my own boss and being in charge of something and just really, really being committed. Like I didn't want to feel like I was just trying it out. I wanted to be really forced to like put my all into something. And that comes with owning the business, it's sink or swim. I think that really works out. And because this business doesn't have many expensive physical assets, it has so far been a good entry point for people like Maddie and Liana and people like myself who are like, oh, I want to try this. I want to experience it. Let's see where we can take it. And I don't think that is a bad thing.
No, not at all. And it's so nice to see a food project like City Beet last this long. Because I see a lot of folks who start businesses, urban, rural, doesn't matter, who put 2-3 years in, give their all. It might be running profitable businesses, but just can't keep up that constant push. And it's so sad because those farms always close and no one takes over them, and kind of and the food access is just lost. So it's so great to see that this food access point is just continuing on in the community. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice. It feels like we're honoring all the hard work that was put in before by helping it or making it keep going. And I think probably if the same person had run it the whole time and been as passionate about it, maybe it would have grown more. But at least each time it changed hands, it didn't get set back. It just sort of kept going. And then once we figured out what we're doing, then we're able to sort of make changes.
Yeah, totally. So maybe it kind of a little change. So you said that, so you're on the farm, Duncan's on the farm. What are your hours like? Are you both there full time right now?
No, so we don't grow in the winter. Kind of a combination of just because we're in so many different little spaces and they're people's yards, it's hard to have the infrastructure to do that. I would say is probably the main reason we don't grow in the winter. So what does it look like? I think this year's a little bit different. So the first 2 years, Duncan and I both did the off-season work, which is definitely not full-time. And last winter, I had, for a short time in the winter, I had like a seasonal retail job. And Duncan was teaching a course at UBC. which is very exciting. And I'm very proud of him. Very happy for him because that's something he really enjoys. But we were both sharing the preseason work. And then for us, we're not really in the field until April, and it's not really a full-time job until maybe the end of April. But sort of January, we're seed ordering and all that kind of crop planning and moving forward. It kind of builds and builds and builds until April, and then it's a full-time job through October, or a more than full-time job, to be honest. And then this year we're doing things a little bit differently because Duncan is actually teaching 2 courses at UBC. So that is sort of a full-time winter job, at least for this term up at the school. So I am doing all of the preseason stuff myself. And I'm finding right now it's about half-time work probably with the seed ordering and getting started on crop planning. And we have some exciting community partnerships this year. So I've been working on getting those set up. And then it'll probably dip a little bit in February and it'll be a bit less work, I hope, once I have those things set up. But we'll put our CSA on sale. And then, we'll start seeding things late February and into March. So work will pick up from there. And then, excuse me, during the growing season, we don't really start harvesting until the end of May or early June, which is when our CSA starts. And at that point, we will bring on more help. Last year, we had 2 part-time employees from June through October. They were like 2 or 3 days a week. And the year before, we had 2 employees who were 4 days a week for that same time period. And then during that period, Duncan and I are working like more than full time. And then this past summer, it was less work for the employees because we also had some UBC students who were getting course credit in exchange for helping us out. So that was really nice. I'm not sure if we'll do that again, but we might. And then in terms of the breakdown of that work, Sunday, Monday are our harvest days, and then Tuesday is our CSA pickup and little market day. So those are the 3 like really big sort of labor days. And then Wednesday, Thursday, we do maintenance around the farm, all the other work. And then Friday, Saturday, we try to take off. Doesn't always happen, but it was really nice to see improvement even between our first year and then this past year. Like we were able to take weekends more often. And then the last thing I'll say about that is sort of maybe 1 day a week, I take a half day to do like business administration, even during the growing season.
It's fantastic to hear you take Friday and Saturday off. I don't know a lot of growers who have their schedule set up that way. And it's fantastic to hear that you all prioritize that, to have those 2 days off. That's really fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that because you're in an urban setting, you have access to a lot more labor or a lot more people who just want to be involved with your food production?
I think the answer is yes. So I don't have the personal experience of working in a more rural setting, but anecdotally, I would say yes. I think, we have access to that UBC program where the students are at least getting course credit. We don't take volunteers. I wouldn't feel good about that because we're a nonprofit, we're not a nonprofit, we are a business. But with the course, they're getting course credit and they're working on the farm. We have access to that. And then there's another organization called Environmental Youth Alliance, and they get funding from the government to find work placements for youth. And then that's funded through their own funding. And we haven't had anybody through that yet, but we've talked about it with them. So I think these programs probably are fewer and further between if you're not in a city. And then I know at least one other person who farms out in Delta, which is not far from Vancouver, but it isn't a more agricultural community. She had a really hard time finding labor. So we were speaking at the beginning of last season because she was like, hey, if people are applying to your farm and you can't hire them, can you send them my way? And that's only like a 40-minute drive from the city, but even that close, I do hear people having a hard time.
Yeah, totally. I can easily see that. You had mentioned earlier that you do a CSA and a little market. What's kind of the breakdown of your outlets for selling your product? CSA, wholesale, marketing. Kind of how does that break down?
So the vast majority of our crops go to our CSA. We last year ran an 86-member CSA, which was kind of an accident. It was only supposed to be 80, and then our website glitched. But that's okay. It was fine. And that's the biggest it's ever been. Like the last several years, it's been around 80 people. And that is, the bulk of our veggies. And then maybe that's like 80% probably of our produce goes into our CSA, which we aim for 20 weeks and a $30 value each week. And people sign up at the beginning. And then we kind of cap it once we've reached the financial value, which I don't know if I actually don't know a lot of other farmers that I've heard of who do it that way. I think often they like commit to a set number of weeks. And I think maybe ours was set up that way. My guess, maybe if you're listening to this, Maddie, you can correct me, but I believe Maddie, who was one of the owners before, she's an accountant and she had a business degree. So I think maybe that was sort of her business mind setting it up this way, where once, we aim for that $30 value. But so the year before last, we reached the $600 total before the end of the 20 weeks. So we capped the CSA at 19 weeks. And then this past year, because the beginning of the season was so slow with the bad weather, we did use up the full 20 weeks. And then, so that CSA, our pickup day is on Tuesdays, and we set it up outside of a cafe in Vancouver that's in like the same neighborhood where a lot of our yards are. The cafe is called the Federal Store. It's run by someone named Colette, who is lovely. And it's just a really beautiful little like corner grocer / cafe. And it's a really nice like community hub, and they let us set up our CSA pickup on the sidewalk outside of the cafe. That's an arrangement that Maddie and Liana set up. And they used to do their CSA pickup at a different cafe that was actually a little bit closer to some of the yards, but there's more foot traffic outside the Federal Store. So they first started just doing little pop-up markets, I think in 2018. Maybe just a couple throughout the season on a Saturday outside of the Federal Store. And then they thought, hey, the foot traffic here is so much better. So then they moved the whole CSA pickup. And then while we are doing our CSA pickup on Tuesday afternoons, we set up a little market table just next to it. And that is sort of the rest of where most of our veggies go. And in the past, like our first year, we did an itty bitty, like statistically insignificant amount of wholesale just when we had a lot of something. And then this past season, we didn't end up doing that at all. And part of that is that we were approached by a neighborhood house. The neighborhood houses, they're like community centers, and they provide services for maybe low income people in the neighborhood and new immigrants. And a lot of them have like a little food bank that they distribute just to people who live in that neighborhood. So the neighborhood that's closest to a lot of our yards in Little Mountain, which is part of the Riley Park neighborhood, they approached us last year and said, hey, why don't we fundraise money together, and then you guys can give us vegetables? And we were like, that's awesome, because, our prices are like organic market vegetables. They're inaccessible to people. And what a beautiful way to give back to the community where we're growing these vegetables, to make them accessible to people who can't afford to be members of our CSA. So we fundraised with them last year, and we raised over $2,000. And then throughout the season, we gave them vegetables. And it's quite a small food bank, so it's not like they have the capacity to take on infinite vegetables. So that was a really nice arrangement just with our scale of growing things. And we really like that partnership. We like doing that work. So I last year applied. I haven't actually announced this yet, so I don't know when this is going to come out, but hopefully I've told people by then. I applied for a grant. There's a credit union in Vancouver called Van City that does a lot of good community work. And they had a grant that we applied to so that we got $10,000 to sort of expand this initiative, which we call Veggies for Neighbors. And then we got another grant through something called the Justra Foundation. So actually this year we'll have a third outlet that is giving vegetables that are paid for by these grants to Little Mountain Neighborhood House, Jewish Family Services, and Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House. And all three of those are in those neighborhoods where we grow. So I think that's something I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, that's fantastic. You've really connected with those local groups and kind of build that network up of local food. That's fantastic. You said something earlier that I want to swing back to. That market where you do the pickups from. I've seen the photos online. It's absolutely beautiful. I love how it's almost like whimsical how nice it looks in front of that store.
Totally. Colette is a very skilled gardener herself. So just like the boulevard gardens outside of it are just lovely, like such nice plants growing in there. And then the building is it, I think, was built as originally a small corner grocer. But it is quite old, and it has really nice tile flooring inside, and they do such a great job, and they're so nice to work with. Like, they just seem so happy to have us there every week, and they're so helpful. Yeah, it's a really nice space.
And that's fantastic that you can like piggyback off of this already current beautiful infrastructure and just add more value to your community. I would really hope folks go on your check out your Instagram online and see just the beautiful photos. They're absolutely fantastic, and it's super nice that you have your distribution day and your farmers market day all roped in one place, one time. It sounds super efficient.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, obviously, again, I've never done the traditional like farmers market thing. And if I could go my whole life being a farmer and never do that, I think I would be very happy. I don't really want to be getting up at like 6 on a Saturday or earlier and going and setting up at a market, which I don't know, maybe someday I'll end up doing that if I start another farm somewhere else. But yeah, I think for now it is super duper nice to just have our own little spot.
Yeah. Are there a lot of, well, maybe it's a two-part question. Are there a lot of other urban farms, for-profit urban farms in Vancouver that you work with or that know about?
None that we work with. And I will say it is like a changing landscape. So there are a few. There are a couple that are nonprofits. I think the most famous is one called Soul Foods Farm. Or just Soul Food. They grow in it used to be industrial space down by the water and a lot of raised beds, and they're a nonprofit, and they employ people from the downtown east side. So people who face a lot of challenges generally. So that's very cool. They've been around for a long time. I think they're quite well known in the urban farming world. And then there's another smaller one called Farmers on 57th, and they have a really cool arrangement with a hospice. And they grow on the yard of this hospice center, and it's beautiful. And that's also a nonprofit. And then the other ones that I know of that are for-profit farms, honestly, I don't think there are as many as there were a couple of years ago. Up until last year, there was another urban farm on the same model as ours called Inner City Farms, run by someone named Cam. And he's great. He's like very involved in the urban agriculture community. He is involved with like farming at UBC, and he has been a good connection for us. But he shut his farm down last year, but it was like pretty similar model to ours. They had yards, and they also had a bigger yard out in Southlands. He's actually how City Beet got our big yard in Southlands. He connected Maddie and Liana with that one. But they shut that down last year. And then, so the only other currently operating urban farm that I know of is called Swello and Fa. And this is only their third year, I think, producing, and they grow flowers. And they're a bit further east than we are. And there used to be another flower farm, which also just shut down this year, but she had moved, she'd consolidated all of her yards, which were in South Vancouver. And then she moved to a bigger plot out in Richmond, which is another like next municipality over, but part of the greater Vancouver area. And it is historically a great agricultural area. It's like very productive soil and is being turned into suburbs, which is a problem, but we don't need to get into it too much. Yeah, but that farm is shutting down now because they had trouble with the municipality. So historically there have been ones, and they kind of come and go.
Yeah, I can see that.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Tilth Soil. This Cleveland, Ohio-based company is producing some of the highest quality potting mixes out there. One of the biggest lessons I learned in farming is the importance of good seed starting mixes, and that's why I included Tilth Soil in my book and have been using their seed starting mix, Sprout, on my farm since 2020. Tilth Soil produces potting mixes approved for use in organic operations like our own. Their living soil is made with fully composted food waste they collect and process themselves. Whether you need a cubic yard super sack once a year or ongoing deliveries for your year-round operation, Tilth has you covered. The team at Tilth can help with shipping, coordination, and provide ongoing support throughout the growing season. To learn more, visit www.tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Real Organic Project. Does your farm deserve to be recognized for all the hard work done on behalf of the environment and your community? Real Organic Project is an add-on certification that partners with 1,000 plus certified organic farms across North America, including my own farm, Rough Draft Farmstead. Available at no cost to farmers and with minimal time commitment, it is a great way to differentiate your farm from mass-marketed corporate organic, where hydroponic production and animal confinement are still commonplace. Real Organic Project is a whole farm certification program to distinguish crops grown in healthy soils and livestock raised humanely on pasture. As a farmer-led movement, we know many hands make for quick work. I hope you will lend yours by signing up for Real Organic Project certification today. Visit realorganicproject.org/no-till to apply. That's realorganicproject.org/no-till to apply. All right, back to the show.
So maybe a little flip, a little of a switch in conversation to production a little bit. So you've taken on these plots that I'm assuming have been worked for 8 years now at this point. How were these beds handled? How are these front yards converted? Was it just compost built on the front yards? How do you build these beds in the city?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are a few yards that have been around from the beginning, and then there are ones that have been added throughout. And our process for adding or converting a new lawn is we'll cover it with a silage tarp for a couple weeks, or, if we found out about it in midwinter, we could cover it for longer, but Duncan and I haven't had any like that yet, just to make sure the grass is really, really dead. And I think in the past, they would have rented a walk behind tiller, like a BCS, and turned it over. But the ones that we've done, we just turned over with a shovel and a broad fork. So we sort of, the grass is dead, and then we just flip the sod upside down so that it can keep decomposing down there. And then we cover it with compost that we get trucked in, which is kind of hilarious to watch happening in a city, these like big dump trucks of compost coming in. It's a very exciting day when we get that dropped off. And then we go around and distribute it. It's a lot of work. We have to shovel it from the dump site into our truck and then drive it around to the different yards. But yeah, that's the process. And then the yards that we've converted, we like to grow like potatoes the first year that we have that yard, or just something that really works the soil. Yeah.
Cool. So if you're going to do like a basic flip of your beds, how would you handle it? Are you tarping those beforehand, or are you what's the process for that?
At the beginning of the season, or the last 2 years, we've done, we broad fork, and then we use a wheel hoe. And then throughout the season, last year, we tried to even do less of that. We're trying to do even less tilling, and that's already, I think, those two tools. I mean, I'm sure there's debate on it, but I've heard some people who don't consider those tilling, or some people who consider the wheel hoe tilling, but not the broad fork. But I'm trying to use the wheel hoe less. And in my winter work, this is something I'm currently researching, how to, become even less tilling and do more sort of no dig coming up this season. But what we would have done last season, let's say, is if the next crop was direct seeded, then we probably would wheel hoe again and then direct seed into it. But if it is transplanting a seedling, then we don't do that. This year we tried to just not even do anything. Like we would just, if it was like a salad green, and so we would have to rake it out of the way. But if it was something else that was like a broccolini, we would just cut it off at the base and leave the roots in the ground and then add the new transplants in. And that's been working pretty well. Something I want to work on this year is figuring out how to add more maybe nutrients throughout the season when we're doing that. Because I think, some things kind of struggled, but overall it went okay. But that is sort of an issue that we have with space, because we don't have anywhere that we could just have a big mound of compost all season to be taking from. So that's something I'm thinking about right now.
Gotcha. And I'm just guessing now, if you're having all these individual spaces, how do you manage like your irrigation, road cover? That is on timers? Do homeowners work with you as well to manage that?
So the homeowners don't do any work, but we do have access to their water. So most of our yards now are on drip irrigation, which is funny to set up because every yard is like, they're not all just squares or rectangles, right? So some of our beds are very funny shapes. So the irrigation is a little bit silly looking sometimes. But we have it set up on timers mostly so that we're not going around. Yeah, and then we had one timer disappear at one of our yards, and then the homeowners there were like, we'll just water it, which I don't think is a perfect solution. So maybe we'll try to get something else going for this year. But yeah, for the most part, or pretty much all our watering is on timers, and most of it is drip. Some of it is overhead sprinklers, but almost all the yards are drip.
And is all that water cost included with the handshake lease of the property?
Yeah, so the homeowners cover water, which is nice. I don't actually even have a sense of how much it is. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's how it should be then. Good. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, another thing I don't have to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, keep it lean. Yeah, don't have to worry about that. You'd mentioned earlier that you don't do winter production, but I may have saw a few tunnels on your Instagram. So do you use it mainly for like summer production, stuff like that? Is that what it's used for?
Yeah. So the big hoop house that we had this year, which is just made out of like PVC pipes on rebar, is actually something that other farmer I mentioned, Cam, gave us because he was shutting down his farm. So this past year was the first time we've ever had something that big. And it covers, we do 3-foot beds with a 1-foot path, and the hoop house is like 4 beds wide and 40 feet long. And out at Southlands, our beds are about 90 feet. So it's like not even half the bed for 4 beds. So it's not much. And then we have this past year, in one of our yards that's more in the city, we planted basil, and the neighbor's cat was using the yard as like its litter box, which if any of our eaters are listening to this, don't worry, it didn't touch the food. But so to get around that cat, we have these low hoops, and we set those up over the basil to protect them from the cat. And then it ended up making beautiful basil because obviously it likes being hot. So that was kind of a happy accident, and we had just an abundance, lots of pesto. But yeah, I do think I would like to figure out how to set those up and maybe do a little bit more shoulder season production, but that's not something we've done so far. And I think that is sort of because most of our veggies go into our CSA, we don't really have well-established like wholesale relationships. So if we produced a little bit in the spring, in the earlier spring, it would be tricky to figure out how to distribute it. Not impossible, and I would like to do that at some point. But yeah, that just is kind of why we haven't really done that so far.
That makes total sense. And you alluded earlier with the cat issue. Do you have any other pests you're dealing with? Non-urban type pests like insect pressure on there. That and are you able to like get around some pest pressure by just moving things to different sites, stuff like that?
A little bit. That's a good question, and a good point. Like something that we have to contend with is that each site kind of is its own growing environment. The soil is very different in each yard, and the pests can be different, and the amount of light exposure, and it just goes on and on. And we definitely have had some pests out at our big site this year. Like almost half of our squash got eaten by raccoons, which was devastating. And they did it right in front of our faces. They were like making eye contact with me eating the squash. And I was like, and then I think that is a little bit of a limitation of our model of being in people's yards, is like, what am I supposed to do about it? I can't build a fence. I can't plant a hedgerow. So I'm not really sure what to do about those guys, except for to plant the squash somewhere else. You're right. That's what we will try doing. And then, we have like one yard where there's like cutworms in the soil, so we don't grow head lettuce there. But then, we just move it to a different yard that maybe doesn't have that problem.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It seems like a level of flexibility that, I don't know, at my farm, when we get cucumber beetles, they're just on the farm. You can't get, there's there. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice if I had like just like a little plot out on the road, just away from here that wasn't close to this. So it sounds like some flexibility you have there, which is really nice.
Totally. Yeah, it's an advantage. There's like a lot of logistical thinking in this model, but that is definitely an advantage that we can kind of like quarantine crops on a different lot.
Yeah. So maybe we can get to the plots you're using for farming. How do you manage let's say, harvest, wash, pack, distribution, you said earlier you had a nice wash trailer. Where is that located in relevance to the other locations?
Yeah, so throughout the growing season, we keep the trailer 6 days a week at a church that's a block away from the Federal store. And that's also a really nice partnership. They let us use their water. We have access to their washroom inside, and we give them vegetables once a week they do like a community meal program. So that is kind of the exchange there. And we keep the trailer parked there, and they give us one parking spot for the trailer and then the parking spot next door. Oh, and they give us their electricity so we can plug the trailer in, and then it is refrigerated. And then our hoses like hook up to the trailer via like the church water. And so on Mondays, we do our harvest at the city plots. And so we're driving around in the truck and harvesting. And then about 4 of our yards are all on one block, which is really, really nice. So those ones we just walk between the yards. And then we sort of, once we've done enough of the harvest, then everybody drives down to the church and we get the wash station set up. And maybe if there's more to harvest, 2 people stay there and keep washing. And then the other 2 people, or whatever it works out to being that day, go back out to the other plots in the city and harvest those. And then the one day a week where we can't have the trailer at the church is Sunday, because they have services, which is kind of a funny coincidence that Sunday was already a harvest day for the farm before they had the trailer and this arrangement with the church, which is a little bit of an issue. It is a nice arrangement and we're very grateful to be in their space. They've been a very good partner to us, but the challenge then becomes on Sundays, it's a big church, so they have a morning service and an afternoon service. So their parking lot is very full all day. So we have to move the trailer by 8:30 in the morning, and we're not allowed to bring it back until 9 p.m. So, and Sunday is like mine and Duncan's Monday. So we're starting our week off with like unnecessarily 12-hour workday. Even if we didn't have to remove it from the church, we would be bringing it with us out to our Southlands yard. And then, so the yard in Southlands, this property is quite large, and they also have a stable there where people can house their horses. So we connect the trailer, we park it right in front of the stable, and we connect it to the water and electricity of the barn. And we do our washing there on site. So we just take stuff right out of the field and wash it the same within the hour often, and then just get it packed away in the trailer immediately.
Wow. So in this trailer, there's a cooler and the wash packer all enclosed in one.
Mm-hmm. As far as I know, our trailer is one of a kind. I'm not sure. I think Betty and Alana kind of came up with the idea themselves, and also were maybe influenced by some people at UBC. And then they hired an engineer who had, I think her name's Emmy, had worked on farms before. So she really understood like the workflow of a wash pack. It's a cargo trailer, one of those like black ones. And they designed it collaboratively with the engineer, and then she outfitted it, like insulated it and put in an air conditioning unit and a cool bot. And then on the outside of the trailer, there's like a stainless steel table that folds down, and then like hookups for the hose are connected to the outside of the trailer. And then we have like a table and our salad spinner and stuff like that we store inside the trailer with the veggies, and flowers. We do grow flowers too. So they all get cooled in there. And then there's like an awning that you can wheel out from the side of the trailer. So it's pretty cool. And I do believe it's one of a kind. So. Yeah,
that's super cool. I've been looking at like options, something like that, but I haven't seen anybody who's gone full out and done that.
I can send you the plan for it if you want.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
You got me on that one. Yeah, I want to see that. And are there photos of the trailer on your Instagram?
That's a good question. Probably. You might have to scroll pretty far back.
Okay.
But I do think there are some on there.
Okay, cool. We'll try to find that and put in the tag in the notes for people to check out. That's super cool. And I think a lot of folks either are working on rented land or are on places where they don't have utilities yet. So I think that'd be a great option for a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know other people who have converted trailers into being walk-in coolers, but the combo of cooler and wash station, I haven't really seen anywhere else.
Yeah, neither have I. I haven't seen a lot of that. So now that you're 2 years into this business, what are some of your financial goals in that's a few years for City Beet? Where do you see yourself heading in the next let's say 5 years?
No,
That's a hard question.
This is like such an annoying answer, but this is how I work. Like my brain works in every element of my life. Like even if it's a small thing, if I set a goal and I articulate it to other people, I immediately lose interest. I don't want to do it anymore. Which I'm not even like, it's not like I have some specific goal and I'm intentionally keeping it a secret from you in this case. I can't give you like an exact dollar amount, but I kind of have alluded to this, I think, earlier in our conversation, where I'm finding, I think I would like for the farm to be like my main thing. I don't want to have winter work unless I feel called to do something. And I don't think we're quite there yet. This year will be easier because Duncan has more winter work. So as a household, we'll be doing fine. But so I think kind of what I'm doing right now is trying to review things and make it more efficient. And I'm trying to calculate to redo our pricing of our vegetables, which has been kind of an interesting thought experiment, but also kind of challenging. And so I am trying to figure out how we can maybe like eke out a little bit more money from this business. And of course, like a lot of people, our highest expense is labor. So I'm kind of looking at like, it took this much labor to produce this many crops. Like, how can we make that better? And that's one of the reasons, besides, caring for the environment and ecosystem health and stuff, that I am considering even decreasing the amount of tilling that we do, just to see if I can like decrease our weed pressure and kind of cut down that sort of bed prep and management time to try to be more efficient. So that was not a very solid answer, but I would like to, I think, increase the profit of the farm, not exponentially. I don't believe in just like growth for growth's sake. But I think, it would be nice to just be a little bit more comfortable.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It sounds like you just want to like tighten it up a little bit and just kind of play with the numbers. It sounds like you really have like a really stable, consistent system with the CSA, the distribution, how it's operating now, but you can then just eke out a little bit more return just by, just
exactly. Yeah. And whether that's like by figuring out how to grow in the shoulder seasons or just, and like, making our existing processes a little bit more efficient. I hope it's doable. And the farm, like it does turn a profit, like we're doing fine. I think it takes up so much. It takes up like more than a full-time job's worth of my mental and emotional energy, like in a good way. I love it. I love thinking about it. But then, it's not actually a full-time job all year round. So that's a little bit of a discrepancy. And I would love for it to like physically and financially fill the space that it fills emotionally.
No, 100%. Because there's nothing worse than like wrapping up the fall season and then being forced to work if you don't have to. Like it's a hard thing to like wrap up all that fall harvest and a push to then just like work a Christmas push and then hit back hard.
Totally.
It's hard on your body.
It's hard on your body, and I think on the mind. Like it takes away from your ability to think about how to make the farm better for the next year if you're like having to go and do something else. So I want to be able to spend this time thinking about how to make improvements on the farm. And it just would be nice to be able to do that without also worrying about money.
Totally. So we did the last two questions of the podcast. Second to last, I want to know what's on your farmer heart? Kind of open platform, anything that's ad related, food related that's been weighing on you lately. So it's kind of an open platform.
I love this question. I've listened to a few of your interviews and it's always so interesting to hear people's answers. Before I answer, something that I like that comes to mind is because I'm an urban farmer, because I'm a new farmer, I don't really exist like in a farming community. So I'm not really around other farmers like talking about these things. So I don't really know what is on other people's minds or hearts. But I think where I come in on this at the moment that I'm thinking about, part of it, and I'm sure it's because I'm like thinking about these financial issues on the farm, but part of it is just like the devaluing of farm labor in general, and that it's so hard for workers to find well-paying farm jobs. And then on the ownership end, it's hard to be able to pay like a living wage. And then, living in a city, and a very expensive city like Vancouver, our living wage is quite high. And so that is something that I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah, totally. I feel like all ag, doesn't matter if it's big ag, small ag, all ag workers are all kind of the hidden workers. Most people don't know ag workers. You might know a farmer, but most people don't know farm workers.
Totally. I find, and living in a city, and because I am a, like a first generation farmer, like my friends are not farmers. So I think in my context, it's like odd that I'm a farmer. I meet people in the city and I say I'm a farmer and they're like, what, how? And then I think sort of maybe bigger picture, an issue that's on my mind, I think because it's been in the news a lot in Canada, and I think it's similar in the States, is inflation. And I think, the inflation rate is very high, the highest it's been in decades. And it's even higher than the average for food. And I think like the central issue that this comes back to in my mind is like private monopolies. In Canada, we talk about like the grocery oligarchs a lot. There are 3 big companies that control like all the grocery stores almost in Canada. So people have been talking about them a lot, recording record profits when there's also record inflation and people literally can't afford to buy food. And then I think in my mind, there's also this parallel between those monopolies and then also on the production side of like large scale conventional agriculture that is not building the soil, that is bad for the environment in some cases. I'm thinking about inflation and climate change and how there's this sort of like similarity between private monopolies and a failure of government intervention and regulation to protect consumers and the environment in sort of a parallel way.
No, 100%. I was talking to Jordan from Midway Farm, and the same kind of thing. It's like, we're not going to build a farm system on $30,000 an acre land and $9 an hour, wages. You're not going to build a local food system built on that. It's not sustainable. It's not accessible.
Totally. And all of us, small farmers out there, I think the work that we're doing is valuable and important and meaningful and hopefully makes a difference. But I'm not going to pretend that we're like changing that I, as one tiny little farmer who feeds 86 households, like that's not food security for everybody. That's not changing the system. We need a lot of this. And that's hard to come by when all of the onus for making that happen is on farmers. We need policy change. Yeah,
100%. Like, you're not going to see an environmental degradation like reversed based on some like a point of profit. Like, nothing's going to come up in your farm business that's going to just incentivize you to not dump excess water into the full of nitrogen into the system, into the water system, unless you're paid not to do it. There has to be that type of stuff to do it.
Totally.
So thank you for that. That was fantastic. The final question, how do you find balance on working on the farm and taking care of yourself?
That's a great question. I'm sure like everybody, it's a work in progress. I think for me so far, just working on the farm has been a huge step in taking care of myself. I mentioned this before, but before City Beet, I was very dissatisfied with what I was doing. I felt pretty like lost and purposeless, and I'm not going to get too melodramatic over here, but I was not very happy. And I think so coming into this business when I didn't know how to run a business and I didn't know how to be a farmer. And obviously I had a lot of support and privilege that made that leap possible, but it was a big leap. And I think that has been really, really good for me. I really love this work. I feel good in my body doing it. And that has been such a delight. And then that being said, of course, it's hard work. And of course, there are other facets of my life that are kind of hard to come by. Like I have a couple of weddings of people who are very important to me this summer, and I don't think I'm going to be able to go. And, sometimes I'm very tired physically at the end of the day when I've worked 3 12-hour days in a row. So I'm definitely trying to work on that. But I think one of the things that was very appealing to me about farming, getting into it, was that this is also kind of just how my brain and my body, like just how it works for me, is that I like to be like all in on something. And then it's very hard for me when I'm in that space to kind of be doing other things. Like when I used to be a student, it caused me a lot of anxiety to like try to have extracurricular activities, like, and a social life and be a student. And so I kind of like that about farming, that for half the year or 2/3 of the year, you're all in and that is what you're doing. And then like you rest in the winter. And I think obviously I need to find little ways of resting and keeping things going for myself during the farming season. But I like that sort of annual cyclical nature of it. I think is very like compatible with just how my brain and my nervous system work.
Yeah, so it sounds like you found like your life balance on the farm.
Yeah, definitely the best version of it that I have found so far.
Wow, that's fantastic, Liana. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk with me about City Beet Farm.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
A big thanks again to Liana for sitting down and chat with me about the history of City Beet Farm. So great to see a farm like this continue on, even after the original owners are ready to move on and do something else. If you want to learn more about their farm, check out their Instagram. Or if you want to learn more about the really cool mobile wash pad, check out the show notes.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here, just jumping in real quick to catch you up on some of what we have going on. Our No-Till Growers YouTube channel, for instance, is back up and jamming again for another season of videos. So far, there is an onion growing guide, which includes why to not trim your onions before planting them, for real, with the science to back it up. A seed priming primer, an essential guide to market garden tools video, and more, and everything we've done in the past. Go over to YouTube and search for No-Till Growers and subscribe. That would be awesome. Also, the No-Till Growers forum is just absolutely booming with so much good nerdy info and conversation. It's free. It's awesome. Go check that out at notillgrowers.com. If you'd like to support this work or support the idea of keeping farming information free and open to anyone and everyone in general, you can pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at notillgrowers.com or one of the no-till hats, which are back in stock. We've got merch there as well. The proceeds from all of those sales at notillgrowers.com go to supporting this work. If it's benefited you and you have the means to pitch in, that would be super rad. Or, even better, become a yearly or monthly patron at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where not only may you get discounts on our stuff, but at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Sean at All About the Garden, Bill Altman, Ian at Grindstone Farms, Stephen Smith, and Oh High Roots. Huge thank you to everyone who supports our show in whatever way that you can. The Patreon page is the lifeblood of our work, so we hope that you will hop on board. And that's it from me. Thanks you all. We'll see you next week. Bye.